You're listening to the Book Talk Today podcast, a podcast that inspires readers to obtain valuable insights to inform, educate, and improve lives. My name is Orn Abdi. I'm an avid reader, best known for the creation of the 1 Minute Book Review community, and I'm sitting down with authors to delve deeper into the books they have written to uncover the story behind the story. Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 28 of the Book Talk Today podcast. Today we are joined by Nick Velasquez. Nick came on episode 10 late on last year, and we invited him back on to discuss his book, Learn, Improve, Master. Nick has become a friend to the channel and to myself. We have many things in common, and in this podcast we delved into topics we discussed in the first podcast just in more depth. We talk about how to become a better learner, how to become a better reader, and how to become a better person and having a better perspective on life. We talk about his experiences traveling to Japan and also what it means to have a different perspective on passion and purpose. I hope you enjoy it. It's been, when did we speak? It must have been for the last podcast.
Maybe.
September? Yeah, August, September last year.
September.
How have you been? What's new?
It's been a slow time for me because a lot of things went wrong all of a sudden. So it's just taking care of everything, like putting up fires, like in my company, and then my dog got very sick. It's like things like that. It got really complicated. Yeah. He's better now, so okay, thank you. So I had to take an emergency trip to Colombia and then come back. Then you have the quarantine. So I haven't been. I think I've been just scattered everywhere. I don't see much progress in anything. So for me, when life gets very messy, I think of two things: it's like workout and read. If you can get those things done, and some writing, although I haven't been writing as much as I wanted to. But if I can read every day, and if I can train my body every day, like if I can train my body and my mind every day, it's like, it's okay. It's okay. Just for now, just focus on the basics, like reduce to the essential.
Yeah.
So that's what I've been doing. I've been reading a lot again. So that's good.
That's
I'm
good.
Happy about that.
What's stuck out to you?
Well, the best book that I read in the past couple of months was The Psychology of Money. I love that book. It's so well written, and the content is on point. I wish I could write that well. The way he approached the subject, that angle, it's perfect. And the title is perfect. The cover is great. The writing is amazing. It's so engaging. It's one of the few books that I've read in the past couple of years where I wasn't thinking, how many pages am I in? How many pages left in this chapter? Like, how long is this thing? No, I just found myself just reading nonstop, not caring where I was, and just I couldn't put the book down. It was awesome. It's great when you have that experience, and you don't get it that often because a lot of the books out there are not that well written. They have good content, but the message is not delivered in the best way possible. And that's something that I learned throughout my own process. It's like, it's not just about the message, it's also how the message comes in. Like, what's the package of that message? That's why we enjoy reading some of the great philosophers. I love reading Nietzsche just because the writing is so amazing. And then the content is behind it. Someone could say the same things and it wouldn't be as appealing. So it has to, but both things have to be on point. I still read the other ones because I need the content, but they could be so much better.
Yeah.
If they had put some work into becoming better writers, those books would be way better.
Definitely. I find that such the case, especially with books. There's so many books out there, but it's the way in which it's packaged, which is so important. I've been reading a lot of fiction, specifically Dostoevsky.
Really?
Yeah, nice. I've been really, my reading over the last, I want to say 6-7 months has moved, I want to say from sort of 90% nonfiction and 10% fiction to very much sort of 60-40. I've made a massive switch, and I haven't really talked about it because I'm sort of going through the process. I'm going along, but something I wanted to discuss with you was, I find that I was doing some writing the other day, some journaling, and I've been doing that more and more really in the last couple of months as I sort of explore writing by hand as a way of getting down ideas rather than perhaps just typing up, for instance, an article, or typing up, for instance, a newsletter. I'm doing everything by hand originally and then transferring that across. And then when I'm writing in my journal, what I've found is that it seems as if every single idea that's being written about now is just a diluted version of what's come before. And I know Ryan Holiday talks about this. I know Robert Greene talks about this as well, about how ideas are very much just diluted over time. And I've been having this thought to myself. I'm like, why am I not reading more books that have been around for a longer period of time? Similar to like the Lindy effect, in the sense that something that's been around for a long period of time, it has the justification of time in order to back it up and back the ideas up.
Right.
And I thought to myself, why am I not reading more books that are ancient, but obviously have weathered time and have these ingrained truths in them? And fiction books tend to have that sometimes more than non-fiction books have. And I've been reading a lot of Dostoevsky, and what I find is it's deeply psychological. It's not just a fiction book. It's got history in it as well. It's the fact that it's based in Russia in the 1920s, and it has obviously the remnants of what society was like in Russia and what it was like for an individual to live during that time. And very much like you were talking about with Morgan Housel, the communication aspect of how he was able to write. I mean, we could probably try, but there was no way that we can write the same way that he has. So
exactly. And I mean, I'm going to ask you more about that switch, but one of the things whenever I read some fiction, it's like, wow, it makes again the act of reading pleasurable. Like it's enjoying. If you catch a good writer, it's like, okay, this is how it should be. Like this is the actual craft, and the message behind it could be just a story. But most of the good stories also have this deeper message behind it, like you were talking about Dostoevsky. So it's interesting when I back in school we had to do, it was called like literary practice, so we had to read 5 books a year. So this is when it was like elementary school, and it was part of it. So I was assigned Crime and Punishment, and then The Foreigner, so Albert Camus. So I had to read them back to back, and it was interesting because they're the opposite perspectives. Like one is completely like overwhelmed by what happened, and then the other one's like, I feel nothing. So that was a good experience in case you're going into that. But I wanted to ask you, so how does it feel for you switching that much from nonfiction to fiction? What's the biggest difference you notice, other than like the content? I'm just talking like on the reading experience. What's been the effect on you?
It felt like I went back to being a kid again, because when I was a kid, I read like just fiction. Like when I was growing up, when I was a teenager, when I was sort of an adolescent, I was reading there's this series in the UK called the Cherub series. It's very similar to Jack Reacher in the sense it's sort of a orphan spy, similar to like James Bond type. And the author came to our school, and I read that series. I think there was like 8 or 9 books, and I read that. And then when I was at school, we used to obviously study Shakespeare, and we studied, there was this one poem. And I used to read quite a lot of poetry when I was younger. And similar to music, in the same way that you were explaining at the beginning of this, is you sort of lose that touch with it. But it was not the sense that I matured out of it. I just changed my interest. And I feel like I'm sort of rekindling that. So it almost doesn't feel strange. It feels normal, because it's something that I was used to not so long ago. Or quite, actually, to be fair, quite long ago, because I mean, really, we're looking at over a decade, really, since I've been reading extensively on fiction. It was really since before I did my A levels in the UK, so before 18. Really, when I was thinking about it the other day, as I transitioned from sort of GCSEs into A levels, which is sort of 17 to 18, you start to think about what I'm going to study so that I can study at university. And then from university, what job am I going to get? And I feel like you just gradually move away from fiction, because there's not the value there that you can perhaps study unless you're studying English literature. You know, I studied politics. So you want to read about economics, history, politics, philosophy, all that kind of stuff. So I almost feel like my reading has become inspiring again. So it feels like I don't want to call it a rebirth, because it sounds like a bit too dramatic, but I feel like I've got an extra bit of motivation, because it's just a different side of the mind and the creativity aspect.
I think something so true to what you say. And just thinking about it now, when you said like you kind of abandoned this for some time, and the same parallel that I said with music. And I think at one point we're so focused on what we should do instead of what we want to do. So we're like, I should be doing this and I should be reading about this. And we put aside what we want, thinking is of lesser value. And when I look back, a lot of the courses that I took, because I used to take a lot of extra courses in university, just not for credits or anything. I just wanted to learn more about business. I'm just going through the notes now as I'm getting rid of a lot of old notebooks and stuff. It's like, this was sort of a waste of time. I should have been doing things that I enjoyed, because I never applied any of those things that I've learned. And it's kind of like when people read nonfiction, but for entertainment, but they want to feel like they're doing something productive. It's like, if you're not using it and if it's not adding that much value, you might as well just spend it reading fiction if that's what you enjoy most. So many times we're just putting the should over the want, and that's probably a mistake. And later on, we rediscover those things. It's like we go back. It's like, I used to enjoy doing this so much. Why did I stop? And it's just because we pile so much other stuff on top of it that we forget. So it's rediscovering those passions, and is just as valuable to enjoy things, even if they're not related to your job or not related to anything else. Just for a moment, sitting down and saying, I really like this. And it's adding to my life.
Yeah, I actually found that with the guitar, going back to the music, is I used to think, oh, I should be doing something better with my time than perhaps just, coming up with some riffs or just, playing around on it. Not even really playing any music, just sort of sitting down and just fiddling around with it. And I thought to myself, what you just enjoy, like, I just enjoy doing it. There's no value in it, in the sense of there's no productivity. I'm not making a song. I'm not obviously selling my music, because no one ever wants to hear that. It's just the joy of doing it. And I don't know whether that's a wider society thing. I don't know whether that's something that we've been programmed into thinking, that if it's not giving you an output that is quote unquote valued by society, then you shouldn't do it. And I thought to myself, that's wrong, because I mean, that's just such a miserable way to live life.
It is. I agree. And I think another part of it is that when we do things just for the enjoyment, we have nothing to show for. So it's like, it's not that we could show, hey, I made this CD, or like I put out this album, or I made this book and I made this thing. Like, I try to write a few things for fiction, and I write a lot of notes on philosophy, and none of them are published. So if someone were to ask me, like, what have you been doing? Like, show me what you've, like, I can't, because I've been doing a lot of things just for myself, just to enjoy a little bit more. So I think part of it is that too, that we don't get to show anything for it, but just the enjoyment itself should be enough. We should take that time to enjoy things. I have this conflicting thoughts about playing video games. I don't play anymore. I used to play a lot when I was a kid. And I keep buying video games. I never play them because I feel guilty when I sit down and play. It's like, I should be doing something better. It's the same subject. And sometimes I think, like, the amount of work that went into making one of those games, you could just be sitting there and enjoying what other humans made for you. All the hours and all this scenery and everything, the mechanics of the game. And some people enjoy it to that level. And I think that's just as valuable. It will be the same as you going to a movie or watching ballet or watching a play. It's like, these people are making something for you. And now you get to enjoy what other humans made. That's also part of the experience of being human. Yes, I think we should all be doing something creative, but we should all also be taking in what others are making for us.
Well, you made a good point about the appreciation of the thing that you're consuming. I think that's really important, because I think what a lot of people do is perhaps they consume, let's say, a book, and they're already got an eye on what's coming next, instead of appreciating what's actually in front of them. And I don't know if there's like a Japanese concept to this, or I'm just sort of thinking through my mind about just not living in the present, so to say, but enjoying the present, like in everything that you do, and really immersing yourself in the enjoyment. So when you're, for instance, playing guitar, or if you're reading a book, or if you're writing something, or if you're playing a video game, or you're watching a movie, you are engrossed and appreciative of everything that has come into existence in order to do that. And I think the Japanese do that before they eat a meal, don't they? They say, remember the phrase, and they give thanks for what's come into producing that meal.
Exactly. Everything from the people that, let's say, if it's rice, that harvested the rice, and all the process that got to be that meal there, is like, thank you that all these things happen for me to enjoy this meal. So a short in story about that. I met this kintsugi master in Japan, and I talk about it in the book, I think, and maybe we talked about it before.
I think you did, yeah.
But he he had like this private collection of his own pieces that he loved the most. And I asked him if he would sell one, and he's like, "No, that's my private collection." And then I explained to the translator, and I said, "Look, I value so much that the Japanese do the itadakimasu, and then I appreciate the meal that they have. And I want to do the same also with the implements that I use. So I have these really nice chopsticks that were made by some artisan, and I want to do the same. So I wanted the implements where I put the food, I also get to give them thanks." And when she explained the answer to this kintsugi master, he looked at me. He's like, "You can take the bowl." And I think he regretted it right after, but but I'm like, I'm taking it. And I have it here, and it's one of the things that I appreciate the most in my house. And every time I grab it, is like everything that went behind this, like the amount of work that this person put into it. And this, I don't know if you want to go there, but I'll just introduce the subject. If you want, we can spend some time in there. But I think a lot about this war against material stuff, and I think that's wrong. It's just it's like most things, it's never black or white. It's just some shades of gray. People say like you should never be looking for material things or loving material things, and I think we should. There are some things in our lives that can become part of ourselves. I think about my guitars, and they've been my life companions. I love them. Like they're part of me, and they accompanied throughout my life, and they're valuable objects that I've given part of myself to them, and they've given so much to me, and someone spends so much time making them. There's this craft behind them. I think it's the love for the material, the longing for, like, I want a more cars, or I want more things. But let's say if you've ever dreamed about having a certain type of car and you love that thing, is like it's also part of our world. Our world is material. There's nothing wrong with having your favorite whatever. Like I'm sure that in ancient times, or even cavemen, they had like their favorite stick, and it became their stick that they would carry, and there was a relationship with that thing.
Yeah.
And why we don't value these inert things in the same way that we also value the alive things. So the way we value plants, like these other things are also material, are part of this world. So I think there is this sense that when you're growing a plant, you see them come to life and you're protecting that life. But we can also be guardians of the inert things as they decay. So you can have whatever thing you really enjoy, and it's coming to age. And they do this in Japan. They have this concept of like things aging and how the beauty that time brings them. So why couldn't I be this protector and this guardian of, let's say, a guitar, in the same way as I read this book, Hiking with Nietzsche, where the guy goes to Sils Maria, near Sils Maria, and there's this huge hotel, and then the owner says, "I'm just the guardian of this hotel, because this hotel will stay here after I pass on. I'm just taking care of it for now." Like, that's such a beautiful way to think also about material stuff. I think it's all about the attitude, but there's nothing wrong with you having an appreciation and even a relationship with some material stuff. It's also part of our world. And sometimes it was made by other humans, and they put their heart into them, just like that play that I'm telling you about.
Something that it's interesting that you bring this up, because I've been recently going through all my stuff and really going through old notebooks, old papers, just clearing out kind of thing. And I try to do it regularly, because I think that I agree with you in the sense that material things aren't bad, but it's your attachment to them.
Yep.
And it's good to have attachment to certain objects, but it's not good to have attachment to all objects, because having attachment to all objects means that perhaps you can't actually derive what's actually important to you. Something that I've been thinking about is, okay, what are the items that I use not daily, but regularly enough that, for instance, if anything were to happen, or if I had to get up and move, for instance, for whatever reason, they are the items that I would take out. You could even do a hypothetical scenario and sense, okay, if my house was burning, what stuff would I take first?
What would you take? Yes,
what would I take first? And I think having those thoughts is important, because it really makes you prioritize the things that you actually like and enjoy and actually use. And I feel like I've made a conscious effort to really change my perspective between material objects. And I actually feel like as you detach more, you actually become more attached to the things that you actually love. So it's that dichotomy.
Yes.
It's not the
Yes.
fact that you actually become so ascetic that you actually don't like material objects. Is it actually enhances your appreciation for the things that you do have and that you do enjoy. And I love that dichotomy there.
Yes, I think so. If you read the book, The Magic of Tidying Up, I also did that, and I cleared my house of many things. And then the things that stayed is like they had been piled on, but so much other stuff that I couldn't realize and I couldn't appreciate the value as much. And I think this goes back to the conversation we were having of, say, you enjoying fiction or that I was enjoying music, and then we pile on so many other things on top. It's like the things that we should do, the books we should be reading, what we should do about work and career, that we forget, and we can't see the shining from the subjects again or these activities. But once you start reducing what you do, it's like, oh, that's right, I used to love reading fiction. That's right, I used to love playing guitar, but I added so many things to my life that weren't that important that now I couldn't see the value in them. So maybe we talked about this last time, but I was saying that too many options dilute purpose.
Yeah.
So if we could learn all language or any language in a month or so, then we will learn 12 of them and we'll forget why one was important. The fact that they're difficult is what gives them that value and make you choose wisely. Same with mastery. Since it takes so long, it takes a lifetime and it's so much effort and so difficult, then it makes you be very aware of what you're choosing, because you can't choose everything. You can't master everything. So you have to make this choice and say, this is what I really like, and then it shines. So it's the same with material objects. So I agree with you. Is the choosing is the one that really matter to us, and not accumulating for the sake of accumulating or showing off or anything else. Is the ones that we really value, that we should keep, and then they shine. Things.
Yeah, I think the material discussion about this concept is very much the first level, because I feel like as you layer up, it comes between like, how do you spend your time? How do you choose, like you said, your activities? How do you want to spend your time, which is the most valuable resource, which is what I've been thinking about more. I think the material aspect, I feel like, is just the step in, because once you actually really embrace this concept, you really question everything that you do. You're like, okay, is this person I'm speaking to, does this person not worth my time in that sense? Because that's probably not the best way to look at it, but is spending an hour with them talking, or for instance doing this podcast with you, is that something that fits in with perhaps my values or some level of purpose or whatever it might be? And the material aspects is an interesting conversation, and you can obviously get into the philosophical and the religious discussions about that. But from a purely practical point of view, being a guardian of material objects, I think that's such a great way to put it, because this water bottle is probably going to last, perhaps if I look after it, longer than I'm going to be able to live. It will be around because it's not made of flesh, if that makes sense. It's not a biological organism. I mean, if that was left in the woods or whatever, it would be around way after I was gone. So everything that we have, we are stewards of. And I almost think of the same as ideas and books. Like we're stewards of that knowledge, and what we choose to do with it is our responsibility, especially if it's something that has a lot of power.
I agree. There's this book called The Art of Seduction, and I had it signed by Robert Greene. And his dedication said, like, to Nick, use this book wisely. So there comes some responsibility in these things. And it's great that you mentioned that in a way, with the books that we read and the knowledge we acquire, we're just keeping it alive.
Yeah.
Like what someone else discovered, what someone else thought about, we're keeping that alive for future generations. Like you said, the books that stood the test of time, but people had to be reading them during those times. It can't be like a book that came up 1,000 years ago and no one read it and now you read it again. It's like people kept it alive for us now to see, like, okay, this stood the test of time. The other ones were forgotten.
That's interesting you said that, because I perhaps haven't given that much appreciation for the journey of a particular book or idea to perhaps come down to me. And that's something that I perhaps want to think about more, is if you read a book, for instance, that is 100 years old, 200 years old, even further. Like a lot of, I went to China in 2013 and I visited Confucius's temple. So I've been learning a lot more about him and sort of rekindling my fascination with him that really happened when I was there, and seeing the impact that he had on Chinese society and philosophy in general. And I think to myself, the words that he has, imagine the amount of people that his ideas have been filtered through and passed down through time in order to get to us. Because it's not recent history. I mean, that's ancient history. You know, if you look at the span of human history, especially when it comes to knowledge. And I think an appreciation for that is really important in order to have gratitude for these ideas, because it can be something so simple to think about, but I think that perspective is really important.
It is. It reminds me of the story. I don't know if you watched the original Cosmos with Carl Sagan.
No, I haven't.
Oh, it's amazing. You gotta watch it.
Okay.
So at one point, he's in Alexandria, and he's like, "Here's where the Library of Alexandria used to be," and he mentions that there was after he got burned, then there were some pieces of paper left, like a few clues of what those papyrus might have said, and one of them said, like, which makes me believe that the Earth turns around the sun. And this was like hundreds of years before someone else came up and said, like, this is what's happening. So like it got lost because no one else could move that knowledge forward. It didn't stay with anyone else. Everyone died and then it got lost, but it was amazing. So how many other ideas that maybe we're just now rediscovering that already existed? So yes, we have that responsibility of keeping some of the best ideas of humanity and the best knowledge to keep it alive by reading it, having it within us, and then moving it along. And we do it when we recommend books, when we talk about those ideas. So yes, it is really important. Now we're talking about like species wise, but yes.
Well, one of the books that I'm reading at the moment is based on this conversation, or based on this idea. It's called The Map of Knowledge by Violet Moeller. And it basically goes down into where knowledge originates. So for instance, we might think of the Western Enlightenment as the source of these ideas, specifically whether it's Western democracy or whatever it might be, science. And this book basically goes and it talks about the Library of Alexandria and how the knowledge was accumulated, and how the operation behind getting all the scriptures and how they went about accumulating all that information. And it tracks the progress of knowledge from basically east to west and how they're able to do that. And I just find it so fascinating because when we think about the ideas that we have at the moment, whether it be Western democracy, whether it be, for instance, philosophy or science or whatever it might be, we almost assume that it's just 30 years, 40 years. As soon as the computer or the internet came, we had to just access this information. But when you read something like this, you realize, well, these ideas have been around for a long, long time. And people a lot smarter than us have come up with these ideas before we have. Yes, they might not have had an iPhone and the internet, but chances are they probably thought a lot more deeply and a lot more intensely about these ideas than we ever have. And I feel like the internet and society now tricks us into thinking that we are the most evolved species that have ever lived by the fact that we just have access to technology. But I feel like that's somewhat of a lie. I think the more that you understand and read, like if you read Confucius, or you read, for instance, Islamic spirituality or theology or whatever it might be, philosophy, and you read, for instance, Nietzsche or these thinkers, they didn't have access to the internet. They didn't have access to the information that we have. But the level to which their thoughts permeated was like, it's, to me, it's really difficult to think about how would I go about creating something like that. I could never even think about having that level of thought to me.
Isn't it crazy to think about it? That I mean, these people were dealing with the same problems. We will always deal with the same problems of like, what's the meaning of life? And then could be love, or it could be what is ethical and how we should all live together and get along. And these are problems that we will always have. So people tend not to read books that are hundreds of years old because like, no, now it's different. It is exactly the same. We might have nicer things and stuff like that, but the human condition has remained, and there is a lot to learn from this philosopher and this thinker. So it saddens me that, let's say, when you talk about the Library of Alexandria, and they used to board the ships that would get there and take all the knowledge and then copy it and all this stuff, and a lot of it got lost. But I think many of the scientific discoveries, that will happen again just because of how we approach science. But I worry about all the ideas that are not on the science side, let's say the philosophy side, that got lost, that were burned during the dark ages, and they were just lost forever. And there were ideas that cannot necessarily be repeated because there is not a process behind it. There is not a knowable universe to observe and then deduct what the laws are, let's say like physics or chemistry or things like that. That yes, we have the natural world around us and someone else is going to think about these things, but the philosophy side of it, how much have we lost? I it's like I think about, I love Nietzsche a lot, and it was very likely that his work would have not continued because it was not popular during his time.
Mm.
It took like something else to happen for us to have those ideas. Otherwise, they would be lost. Same
Mm.
with if you read A Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor
Mm.
Frankl. I think that the original book had come like 30 years before, or something like that, and it
Mm.
only got popular when he partnered up with another publisher and they reworked the thing or something like that. Otherwise, we wouldn't know about it.
Mm.
We have no idea of logotherapy, nothing. We'll be lost.
Yeah.
So it's,
I just think
I don't know.
the amount of people through history that have had these ideas or had these experiences, and if they had the chance to write them down,
Yeah,
imagine what be able to learn. I think of Alexander Solzhenitsyn in the Gulag Archipelago, and the fact that
I don't know it.
he, oh, it's a, oh my God, Nick, you need to read
Oh
it.
yeah. Okay.
It's a
What's the
deep
name
book.
again?
It's the Gulag Archipelago.
Okay.
I can send you the details afterwards. But
Yeah.
essentially, the
Awesome.
book is
Thanks.
very similar to Viktor Frankl's in the sense of someone's experience through a Soviet Gulag, so not Auschwitz. It was a Soviet Gulag during
Okay.
the Russian period, and it talks about his experiences of being in a Russian Gulag, and it's very much a commentary on human nature, very similar to Viktor Frankl's in the sense about what is meaning and how you can derive meaning in an environment that isn't the most pleasant, and it's very graphic. It's very deep. I would say Viktor Frankl's is very much on the sense of what potentially humans are like, but he doesn't talk too much about his experiences. He
Yeah.
sort of talks about the philosophy more towards the end of part. But Alexander Solzhenitsyn goes very deeply into what he saw, and it does get
Oh
quite
wow.
heavy at times, if I'm not going to lie. I think I remember reading it the first time, and there was some periods that I kind of had to stop reading because I thought this is just a slight bit too dark. But I actually spoke
Yeah.
to one of my to Adam Lowenstein, who's been on the podcast before. We had a chat the other day, and I've been reading a lot of books. So one of the books that I'm reading at the moment is Ordinary Men by Christopher Browning. So it's about the
Okay.
Battalion 101 battalion in Nazi Germany, and about how you can have ordinary people that commit like the most heinous of crimes, and what
Yeah.
that means. And I just feel like when you read something that's very dark, people almost assume that people have this fear that if you read something like that, you'll turn into someone like that. It's like it's the same with metal music, that you feel like you're just going to start worshiping the devil if you just start listening to metal music, but it's just not the case. Like you can be a good person, you
Yeah.
can be a normal person, but listen to sort of Black Sabbath or whatever. And I think that what reading something that deep, whether it's like Man's Search for Meaning, some would consider Man's Search for Meaning to be a deep book and very heavy book, but it shines a light on what's good in the world at the same time, because you think about why evil isn't everywhere all the time when you read something like that, and I think it makes you appreciate, for instance, the goodness that's around. So yeah, and going back to the Gulag Archipelago, that book, basically what he was able to do was he basically memorized everything. Then when he left, he wrote down everything off memory. And I thought to
Wow.
myself, it's 2 volumes, and the one that I have is an abridged version, so it's a smaller version, but it's sort of, and the abridged version is like 400 pages, like 500 pages. So it's 2 volumes combined.
Wow.
And the book basically left Russia and it went into the Western world. And it was his experiences that taught the West what was actually happening in Russia, because no one really knew what was happening.
Hmm.
And that then became one of the main reasons for the fall of the Soviet Union. So imagine if he didn't write that book and there wasn't the fall of the Soviet Union. One person in one book had that impact. And I thought to myself, oh my God, imagine the ideas that, for instance, were in Alexandria, or the ideas that people had the chance to write it, the kind of world that we would be living in.
Yeah, that's crazy. Something that I think about a lot too, and going with the book you're recommending, is that books are low tech, are very low tech. It's nothing. It's just a written word on paper. I mean, at the time when they created writing, it was the biggest advance in humanity. But for now, what we have, we think of it as low tech. But you get to travel in time, and then as you're reading these stories, you're with these people where they were, and like hearing their most inner thoughts. And just, I don't remember where the quote quote comes from, but they say like people who read get to live thousands of lives. You pick up meditation, Marcus Aurelius, and like you're listening to this person's inner thoughts. Like no one else had access to that while he was alive. No one knew what he was thinking necessarily because no one had that access. And then he put it all down, and then later on, now we get to walk with him. Now we get to live what he was living, and that's just incredible. I don't know of anything else that has that power.
Yeah, I don't know. The thing I think about, Nick, is we have the internet and we have video. So for instance, we have this podcast. But the thing is like this will be sat on a hard drive, or this will be sat on the internet. But the internet could go. But the thing is when you have something that's physical, I mean, that could, for instance, be sat in a closet for 100 years and it might get a bit moldy, but if it's in a box or something, rats might not get it and it'll be around. But if the internet goes down or my hard drive goes, then this video is gone. So I feel like the written word or a book or something that's physical, that's written down, has a lot more value. And that's why I'm tending to write more by hand. I watched a really interesting video with Neil Gaiman, the fiction writer, about how he writes all his first drafts by hand with a pen. Have you watched that?
Pen. Yeah, I watched that. I love him.
I love it.
It's so good. It's so good.
I love it. And so I've rekindled my love of that, because when I was at school, we used to write with fountain pens. And I think since we last spoke, I've definitely been, as I think about it now, rekindling a lot of the things that perhaps I forgot about, or things that I didn't appreciate when I was younger that I used to do. And it's something that I feel like I'm going to spend more time sort of rekindling those things that I really enjoyed when I was younger, because I think as you move into the quote unquote real world and you become an adult, you move away from the things that perhaps you enjoyed when you were a kid. And I don't necessarily think that's a good thing.
No, it is not. And I've heard Robert Greene talk about this. I used to think about it too, and then I read it when he wrote it, like, yeah, okay, this makes sense. And now this kind of validates it even more. And he was talking about that if people are looking for their passion, it's like, try to look at what you enjoyed doing when you were a kid. It's most likely that same passion is there. It's just that you pile so much stuff on top of it that you forgot. So like, try to remember what you used to enjoy when you were a kid, and most likely like start looking for your passion there. Talking about passions, then my perspective on that is that you develop them. It's kind of like a relationship. So you may have like an initial attraction for someone, but that doesn't mean it's going to end up being a loving relationship. So at the beginning, like something shiny, like, oh, I like this person, and it's all good in the beginning, and that's how you kind of try different things. But then passions are developed as you work through them, as you spend time with them. I think that's something that we don't talk enough about, and it's just the fact of spending time with things, how it strengthens relationships. And it could be human relationships. People underestimate the value of just spending time together. It could be doing nothing, but it's just that closeness and those years that you spend with something that starts strengthening things. It can't be replicated in a couple of days or months. I remember this quote from Christopher Hitchens. Said, the bad thing about growing old is that you can't make new old friends. Like, that doesn't happen on demand. These are relationships that you have to be cultivating. So it's kind of the same with passions. You develop them over time. At the beginning, you might have an initial attraction, but it's only when you start spending more time and dedicating and making sacrifices and seeing the difficult parts and seeing kind of the things that freak you out and that get you mad and all those things. And you say, hey, this is still what I want to do.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how you find it.
That's the good litmus test, actually, for whether something is actually something that you want to pursue, is if you're able to work through that difficult patch and still pursue it. That's usually, for me, that is the transition from passion to purpose, which is something that I talked about yesterday. So yesterday I spoke with Hector Garcia, the co-author of Ikigai.
Yes.
He came on the podcast. So I spoke to him about it, and we were talking about passion and purpose, and asked about it, his perspective on the difference between passion and purpose. And he likened it to the fact that, he could be passionate about, he talked about his experience of amateur photography and how he took that up, and he was dedicating 4 or 5 hours every Saturday to Lightroom and Photoshop. But then after a while, he found himself going away from what he found truly his purpose, which was to write and communicate these ideas to help people and transform and educate their lives. And he said that a passion is something that sticks around for a short period of time, that gives you an impetus to go and do things, and it makes you inspired. But the purpose is something that you would, for instance, you, when you wrote your book, if I remember rightly, you spent maybe 5-6+ years on it. And if it was a passion, you probably would have given it up within sort of 6 months, maybe a year, pushing it. But because you found a deep purpose within it, it meant that you were able to go through those. And I think that about that a lot with anything that I take up now is this just something that's going to last for 6 months, or is this something that's going to fit in with my general purpose of how I want to live my life?
What's interesting is that sometimes it's hard to know if things are going to stick around or not. Sometimes, like you have that initial drive and you have to work through time, and people say, well, wouldn't that be a waste of time if later on I realized that was not it? There's no other way to do it. It's the same with relationship with humans. So people say like, oh, but I don't want to invest time in this person and maybe it doesn't work out. Well, if you're not investing anything, it's not going to work out anyways. You do have to risk something. And sadly, what we have to risk to find those passions is time. We have to try the things and then stick with them for a while, and if that keeps like lighting up a fire inside of us, then we keep going. Sometimes it gets dark, but then we kind of know what it's. My perspective on passion and purpose is that passion is something you do for yourself, it's something you enjoy doing for yourself. Purpose is what you do for others.
Okay.
So passion is like, I enjoy doing this is so much fun. Purpose is like, I enjoy it, this is so much fun, but I want people to benefit from this. So it's when you cross that threshold of, now I'm doing a benefit for other people. To me, that's purpose. It's when it serves more than just you. Passion serves you. Purpose serves everyone else.
It's like an immediate desire to fulfill whatever that you want to do is sort of a passion, for whatever that might be.
I would say so. Let's say, oh, I have a passion for playing guitar, or may have a passion for writing, but it becomes purpose when I say, people need to know this information. I need to put it out there.
People need to hear my sick riffs.
So others, so others can like enjoy it or benefit from it in some way. I was reading, there was this review that I saw for my audiobook, and it's probably the one that hit me the most. It was like this 80-year-old person. So like, I read this book and I started playing the piano again, and it made me believe that I can learn again. I'm going to pass on this to my grandchildren, so they can also know that they can learn anything they want. It's like, okay, that made it worth it. And purpose many times is difficult, but we keep going because we know there's benefit beyond ourselves. That's where I make the distinction. Passion is just, it satisfies you.
How did that make you feel?
Oh no, that was amazing. That made all the effort worth it. It's like, it made me think about the times that I was so frustrated working on the book that I wanted to give it up, and then pushed through that pain and said that this is why I was doing it.
Yeah.
This just is the validation of those years of work.
For one person to say that must have been so much.
Yes. Because you never know who you're going to impact so much. So the dedication that I wanted to do for myself, like on my book, to myself, it was something along the lines of like, I'm sorry, Nick, that it took so long, and you might not be able to fulfill some of your dreams that you wanted to do when you were a kid and before this book existed. But maybe by having written this book, you'll help someone that still has the time to fulfill theirs.
Yeah, I think that's really important, because we've had people that actually have messaged me from listening to our first podcast and said that they've been inspired to learn something. And even my mum is listened to it and she felt inspired to learn, and she's rekindled her passion for art,
Nice.
and recently, and she even traveled to Japan. She did a residency and in the foothills of Fujisan, and she loves it. And I feel like these topics are really important to discuss, and how learning, and your book in particular, is a great manual for anyone perhaps who wants to learn something new, or gives them the confidence and really the inspiration to take up something new. Because I feel like everyone wants to do something. They want to try something new. They want to do something to improve their lives, or just for enjoyment. And it's almost as if they convince themselves that they shouldn't do it before they even try. And sometimes all they need is just that light little sort of kick up the backside, whether it's, you know, hearing an audiobook or listening to this podcast or reading any book that inspires them. You know, like you said, you just never know who's listening.
Yeah, you never know. And part of it, of people having that doubt of starting, like, one is when I talk about that myth of like you either have it or you don't. Some people get things quickly at the beginning, but maybe they slow down later. Like everyone's process is different. And but is this unrealistic expectations that we have about learning? And part of it is because we don't see the process behind it. And that was the whole premise of the book, is like, let me show you what goes behind all this, because you only see the glamour, the end result, and the masters make it look so easy that when you do it, you think you suck completely and you'll never be that good. Like the gap is too big, and you're not seeing kind of the process behind the magic, so you think you don't have what it takes, and then you give up before even trying. And a big part of it is just unrealistic expectations. But when you see that the process is difficult and someone tells you, look, it's going to be tough, it's going to take time, but you can do it. To me, that's more motivating. I'm more against the positive thinking of like, you can do everything you want and it's so easy. No, it's going to be really tough. You're going to hate it many times, but I promise you that you can make it, and let me show you how. To me, that's more motivating. Someone shows me how difficult it's going to be, but then shows me the path to get there. But yeah, so a big part of it is just that people don't take on new skills because they think they don't have the talent, or it's like it's not for them because they don't pick it up right away.
I just thought, I just thought of another book that I've been reading recently, and I thought I wanted to share it with you. You might like this. It's called Daily Rituals by Mason.
Oh, yeah, I have it.
Oh, you have it? Okay, cool. Okay, good. The thing is, like, I love about that is a couple of things. Is all these, I call them fake gurus, who say that their way of living life is the best way of living life in the most productive way. And then you read this and you realize there's actually no one way.
Yeah.
It highlights the importance of habits, your own habits, not one form of habits. For creativity specifically, because it seems like everyone in this book had their own habits and their own quirky superstitions or habits and whatever it might be. But the thing that I took from it as well is the hours that they used to put in every single day into their craft over decades. And it's very easy to, for instance, for me to appreciate, for instance, Dostoevsky, or for you to appreciate Nietzsche, but we don't know how long they spent on them. They must have spent hours on hours daily thinking about these things, writing these things, for really no validation. And that's something that's really important to discuss as well, is for a long period of time. For instance, if you're doing something, for instance, we talked about it earlier, for instance, might be writing. You know, I want to talk about something that I rediscovered recently, which was 20,000 words of fiction that I'd written 3 years ago that I completely forgot about.
Okay. Oh, wow.
And so I had
something exciting to see.
I had, the story was, I had Phil Bown on the podcast. So he wrote a book called Cows Can't Jump. And on the podcast, I'm trying to have more authors that are diverse, whether it's, for instance, fiction, or whether it's science, or like yours, it's like a learning book. And he was discussing his love for historical fiction. And then I'm like, I love historical fiction. That's like my favorite genre within fiction. And he was talking about a book that he read on mudlarking. And mudlarking is essentially in the River Thames in London. I don't know if you visited London, but essentially when the tide recedes, all these artifacts that have been around for thousands of years present themselves, whether they be shields or swords or Roman coins or whatever it might be. And mudlarking is essentially going down there and picking out these objects, essentially.
Okay.
And he was saying how he wants to write a story based on what it would have been like at that time. And he just got inspired by watching that documentary. And I thought to myself, wait, I've written something very similar to this. So I read a book on the siege of Constantinople in 1453.
Okay.
And I love Ottoman history as probably my favorite period of history. And I was just inspired to write something. And I remember it very clearly. I went to accounting college and I was bored. And I was like, I can't be listening to this lady because she annoys me. So I just spent 3-4 days writing, and I wrote like 20,000 words, and I forgot about it. And the conversation that I had with him reminded me. So I opened up my MacBook Pro. I haven't opened it up in like, I don't know, 3-4 years, you know, because I use my actual, you know, desktop computer. Okay. And it's not that bad, to be fair. I thought it'd be terrible when I thought about it. But it was just interesting for me about how sometimes is from a creativity point of view that you're inspired and you come across these ideas. And it's definitely something I'm going to keep on pursuing, because one of the questions that I do get is, are you going to write a book? And people often think that I'm going to write a non-fiction book, 'cause a lot of my reading is non-fiction. And I'm like, probably going to do this. That's probably going to be it. And I'm super excited about it.
That's awesome, man. I'm excited for you. And
Yeah.
that's an advice that everyone that I talked to that had written a book said to me. Is like, you have to write a book that you must absolutely write. It's something that you could not write, because the process is so grueling that it needs to be that fire behind it that's going to sustain it. It can't be an idea that you just feel, oh, I kind of like this, I'm going to write a book about it. No, it's like, it really needs to be something you're passionate about. So I think just the way you light up talking about it, that's probably it.
But the thing is like, I'm big on thinking about not fate per se, but like coincidence. Like, I think coincidence is perhaps about derivation of fate. But like, I had forgotten about this for a long period of time, and now it's popped up again. And then I found it, and now I've been speaking to a couple of authors. I spoke to Anna about it the other day. I spoke about you now. And the thing that I wanted to talk to you about is, perhaps we get distracted into thinking that perhaps working on something in the sense of being there in the present is the only way of working on something, whereas you perhaps could be working on something for 3, 4, 5 years longer, but you're not actually working on it. It's sort of sat in your subconscious.
Yes.
And then once the opportunity presents itself, you already have all this information ready to go, but you haven't really been thinking about it. That's what I've been thinking about recently about that project. Is I've read so many nonfiction books. I've read so much philosophy, history in that period, that is going to complement that piece of work, but it wasn't actively doing it. Yes. And I think sometimes we get distracted into thinking that actively doing something is the most important thing.
That's a great point to touch on, because a lot of creativity has to do with you focus intensely on something, and then you relax and you let your subconscious kind of brew these ideas. So when they talk about like the epiphanies that happen like in the shower or just taking a walk, it's because now it's your subconscious, you gave it an order, and now it's working behind the scenes to kind of fix that thing. But so it comes from a moment of intense focus and then relaxation. So you contract and expand. The thing about that is that you can't be working on something else necessarily with the same intensity. So you cannot go deep and then you relax, but you can't be going deep into something else. So one of the things when I was finishing my book, I was only writing maybe 2-3 hours a day, but I was thinking about the book the entire day. I'll be taking a shower and these ideas will be coming up. It's like, I need to fix this thing. So, and the book was with me 24 hours a day. There was a time I woke up in the middle of the night and said, I need to fix that paragraph on chapter 3 that I had not seen for months. Like, the whole book was in my head because I was thinking about it all the time. So it's not that I was working on it actively, writing or editing, but it was in the back of my head the whole time. Also, I had a period for 2 years that I didn't write or was reading much of it, but the idea of the book was there in my head. So whenever I read something that was mildly related, it was adding to it, and you're kind of putting all these pieces together. So right now, I haven't started officially working on it, but I want to write about creativity.
Okay.
And I know that everything else that I'm reading right now, it's going to be adding to it. And it's because now the net is there. So think about it this way. It's like you're casting this net and you don't touch it, but things are going to be stuck to it. They're going to fall in there. And the moment you want to grab that net and do something with it, like, I have all this other material there. So it's kind of that way. Once you have that kind of that mental frame where you said, I want to work on this thing, now your mind starts looking up for the pieces and making the connections, even if you're not actively trying to do it. It's like when you want to buy a certain car and now you see it everywhere. Yeah. It's the same thing. I told my mind, hey, we're going to be doing some work on creativity. So even if I'm not reading anything on creativity yet, I know the filter is there to catch anything that is mildly related to it.
Yeah, that happens so many times to me as well. Like, you just make the intention to do it, and it seems like the things that happen for the best are always that way. Like, you set the intention and it almost seems as if the universe or anything, it just, things come together. And I feel like that's just a great place to be, because then you know that that idea is somewhat validated because you believe in it, things are aligning on it, and it gives you extra momentum to continue doing it, you know.
Yes.
Or for instance, you might have an idea that you really perhaps want to do, but it seems like things just aren't falling into place, and sometimes you just have to let it go because you think to yourself, I want this, but it just seems like timing's not the right thing. And this is something I wanted to talk about as well, is the fact that I know that that idea that I want to have will require my full attention. Like I only want to be doing that when I'm doing it, which kind of makes me feel like now's not the right time. And this is what I wanted to talk about, is the fact that just because you want to do something, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to drop everything now to then go and do it. Like you need to sometimes have this idea, the fact that timing is important as well, and context and everything. And that's what I've been thinking with my idea, is now's not the right time, but it's there, and I'm thinking about it in the subconscious. But when the time is right, I'll know it, and then it will come together. It will.
Yes. I think that has to do a lot with what kind of person you are. So for some people, the this is not the right time, it becomes just as the not doing the work and then create an excuse to do something else. But for others, it could be like it does really feel like it's not the right time. And that is true. So it had happened sometimes in my life, and I had both experiences. So it's really doing that inner work of searching within yourself and saying, is this really not the right time? Or am I just postponing it because I don't want to sit down and do the work? I've had both in my life where I said, like, this is not the right time. And when I look back, I said, you know what? It was the right time. Because let's start with this. There's never really a right time. But just in the context of what we're talking, I understand what you say, the right time and not the right time. So it happened in my life before when I said, like, this is not the right time. And years later, I look back and said, I should have done it then. I was just procrastinating. And all the times when I said, this is not the right time for me to get involved with this, let's just wait. I need to have my full attention. I need to finish these other things before I can tackle this. And it turned out to be right. Like I was about to leave for Japan last year, and I had some cash on hand, and I wanted to invest in commercial property. But I only had like 2 months to do it. And I was like putting some energy into it. And then I said at one point, you know what? This is not the right time. I won't be here. I can't take care of it. This is just not the right time. And look, and then the pandemic happened, and it would have been awful. I bought a commercial property and put it there and then leave for another country. It would have been a complete mess. So then I was right. So it's really a matter of, it's case by case. You have to look within you and say, is this really not the right time, or am I just putting it off?
How do you make that distinction now? Is it an intuition?
I don't know if it would be an intuition. I think it's just looking at everything else you're doing in life and realizing if what you're doing is essential or is just another distraction. So let's say for me, if I wanted to, I'm working on doing some online courses, and I know I'm putting it off, and I'm saying, well, this is not the right time for me to put in all this energy. But when I look at everything else that I'm doing in my day, it's like, no, man, you do have the time. And it feels like I just don't want to sit down and do it. So in a way, so if you have a lot going on, let's say with your podcast and your business, and there are a few things that you have to organize, and you say this needs my full attention, and you honestly realize it, then that's fine. But if you kind of do a recap of your time, you can even track your time for a week, like what you're doing, what you're spending your time on, and then deciding, is this really valuable, is this really essential? And then you realize all those things you really need to take care of them, is like, okay, probably it's not the right time.
That's pretty much the exercise that I did.
Yeah, it needs some work to realize, is this the right time or not? Other things could be just your level of skill. Let's say there are other ideas for books that I have, and I'm thinking, I don't have the writing skill to do this right now. So I should be doing something else. So for me in writing, I've been doing a little bit of fiction writing and some practice. So I sit down and I say, okay, describe the scene where you are, or the person just came in, and stuff like that. And I know that I don't have the skills yet to, let's say, do a novel. So work on those exercises, do short stories, get good at it. And now then, if you want to work on a novel, then that's fine. So I'm still working at it, but it's indirectly, because I know there are pieces of me that are not ready to do the work the way I want to. So I think is Neil Gaiman, he talked about a book that he stopped for about 20 years. He
Yep.
said, I don't have the skills.
Yep.
Then 20 years later, he said, okay, my skills are better. I don't think they're gonna get any better than this. I think I got to the point where like I'm at the height of my powers.
Yeah.
Now is the time to write that book. And it was probably the right decision.
That's an interesting concept as well, because that could also be an excuse for procrastination.
Yes, it could be.
So yeah, I think what you said is a case by case basis, and you have to make that decision yourself about whether your intention and whether your situation is the right one. It goes back to there's no black and white. There's only different shades of gray. I love that. It's brilliant. It's such a great way to look at life, because so many people right now are thinking only black and white. Like, this is the right way to do this. This is the wrong way to do it. And I feel like non-fiction and self-development books sometimes say that to you, is like, this is the right way to do this, the wrong way to do it. And I feel like this is partly one of the reasons why I've not moved away, but perhaps made a slight change in percentages wise between non-fiction and fiction, because like so much of life is gray. And when someone says their way of investing in money, or this way of productivity, or this way in doing this, and this is how you should set up a business, and it's like, yeah, but there's many ways to do it. And
what I was going to say is that a part of it is because that message sells well. So when you're marketing that you have the right answer, then people flock to you. So it's less interesting when you say like, hey, I have a model that kind of worked, but there are many others that also work. And you get to choose. So a big part of it is just that. It's what sells, and then people seem to be more confident, and then others like to follow people that seem confident. But this is something that creates a problem in society, where you're asked for opinions that you're supposed to have like a radical opinion on demand. And many times it's just, I don't know enough about this subject to give you an educated opinion. And if I give you an opinion off the top of my head, that might be even more dangerous, because once it's out there, I'm going to try to defend it. Now it becomes like, once you say it, now your brain starts coming up with all these ideas why you agree with it.
Yeah, like an ideal.
Well, at the beginning, you didn't even have enough information to build an opinion in the first place. But whoever says that is like, oh, well, he doesn't know. And people rather listen to someone who says, I know it. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to figure it out. I figured out. Here are the tablets of the commandments, and there you go, my son. So that sells really well, and it's unfortunate because, like you're saying, it's just shades of gray, but that's a message that doesn't sell as well. People don't want to do that work of figuring out how it applies to them, to do all these little changes. And okay, here it applies, here it doesn't. A common pattern that I saw, or that I've heard when I talk to people who are really good at something, most of the time they answer questions with "it depends." It's usually never yes or no. It's like, what are the circumstances? It depends.
Something that I think about, that I've been thinking about a lot recently, and you wrote a book on learning and mastery, and something that you're very, I want to say, passionate about, but it's probably something that gives you a lot of purpose. That's probably a better way to put it. is the fact that, learning is somewhat like memorizing, but application is where the understanding comes. And it's something that I've been really thinking about, is when I think about, for instance, habit formation, or whether I think about productivity, or whether I think about a concept that I feel like I know and I read about quite often, I'm like, do I understand it? Like, do I really understand it? And something I've been thinking about is the scientific principle of like first principles. Is if you can't go back to first principles and explain that concept and sort of derive different ways of explaining it through different contexts, you don't really understand it. You've just memorized. It's like memorizing a dictionary definition of what it is, rather than really understanding it. And I question myself a lot now about whether I truly understand it, because if I don't understand it, then I need to read about it more. And this is, I feel like, what some people read. Like, I get a lot of people asking me questions like, oh, I've read this book and, I didn't really get that much from it. I'm like, how many times have you read it? It's like, I read it once and I finished it a week ago. I'm like, well, you're not going to do, like, you have to spend a lot of time on it. You have to really extract the information from it. You're going to have to reread it. You're going to have to apply it. You're going to have to go back. You're going to have to reflect on the ideas. Like, reflection on the ideas is so important, and writing about it and thinking about it and talking about it. And it's almost like I feel like books have become somewhat throwaways. It's like this book I've read, okay, it goes back on the shelf. This book I've read, it goes back on the shelf, and then you can just say to your friend, "Oh, I've read all these books."
Uh-huh. Yes, exactly like that. I feel the same way. And I think, well, the way I do it is I start reading a lot for exploration. It's like, what's out there? What do I need to know? What do I need to be aware of in this subject? So let's say if I'm going into investing, I'll read maybe 5, 6 books on investing. And I just want to know what's out there. And I'll go through them like back to back. But once I finish those, that's when I go back to studies. Like, now I know what's possible. Now I know what's there. Now I know where the holes in my knowledge are. Now let's go deeper. So to me, if you're reading for quantity, it needs to feel like it's an exploration, and you have to have the understanding that it's an exploration. That knowledge is not with you. You're just aware of it. But if you do want to turn it into understanding and then memorizing it, now you have to go back and restudy, take the notes, do the reflection, all the other parts. So I support the reading for quantity as long as it's an exploration and it's understood that that knowledge is not with you. You're just becoming aware of a new world, of new ideas. But if you want to incorporate them into your life, you can't just move on. You have to come back and then do the work.
I had someone on the Q&A. So I do a Q&A every Sunday on my Instagram. And I had someone who came on, I want to say perhaps late last year, perhaps early this year. I think it was late last year. And he was a bit older. I think he was perhaps mid 50s, early 50s. And it's weird for me answering questions from someone who's that old, because I'm like, 27, dude. Like, why are you asking me? You've got a lot more life experience. But he said something very similar to what we're discussing. He said, look, I've been reading these types of books for like 30 plus years, and I don't particularly have found any value in doing it. And I thought to myself, ouch. I'm like, and I asked him some questions, and I sort of talked about his experience, not so much to say, oh, this is what you did wrong, or it wasn't very like that. It was really trying to understand what his process has been. And he was just saying he would just go from one book to another. And he said, I've read that guy, and then I read that guy, but that guy says something different to that guy. And then I read a third guy, and then he says something different. And then I'm just in this state of constant confusion about what the right thing to do is. And I think you sometimes get paralysis if you read too much or you consume too much. It's probably not read, isn't. If you just consume too much, you get paralysis. And I think that is something that perhaps if you're inspired to read more or learn more, you need to have it at the back of your mind, in the sense that sometimes too much information is not a good thing.
Yeah, it's a good point. And we have to limit ourselves as well. It's like, if I'm taking on a subject, it can't be 20 books on the subject. Like, I'll pick up maybe 5. And at one point, it's like, yeah, I know there's much more that I'm going to miss, but I'll never have the entire picture. I'll never read all the books in the subject. I think I have just enough to have like a decent understanding of the subject, and I can move on and now I start applying. And if anything feels off, then I can move on to another one, get another book that might go even deeper. So it's kind of putting those limits of like, okay, this was enough. So for me, when we spoke last time, I was trying to reduce the amount of books that I was reading, and I took a lot of from my shelves and I put them aside, thinking this ones I'm going to give away because the subject doesn't interest me as much as it did when I got the book. And thinking about it in the sense of I only have a limited amount of books that I can read in my life is making me more conscious of what do I want to read. So there is this awesome thing that I read from Warren Buffett, the famous investor, and he was giving a lecture, might have been at Harvard, and he said, if you want to be a better investor, just imagine this. Imagine that I give you a coupon that it has like 7 places where you can punch a hole. Okay. So once you're done, once you punch all the 7 holes, and that's it. Now imagine that's the investments you can make in your life. You only get to do 7. How careful would you be about every investment you make? Really damn careful. So many times I buy books thinking that I'll just have my entire life and it will all be good. And maybe last year when I was looking at bookshelves, it's like, I won't get to read all this. It's just not going to happen. I started doing just basic math. And I said, my life is not going to be enough. And what's the point? Like, what's the point if I read all this until I'm 70 and then I'm 70, like, okay, I'm ready to leave now. Like, no, man, it's over.
Well, it's not over, but it's just.
But it's like many things will be over. Like many things that wouldn't
opportunities will be open.
Yes.
Will be over. Yeah.
Yeah. So okay, what is the right balance of what I read, what I apply, and just realizing that I need to just choose very carefully and reduce and be okay that I won't get to do it all. And that makes it even more special because the things I do get to do, those are the ones that I put more value on. So again, too many options dilute purpose. But if you start restricting yourself, now you find a true value. And this is also applies for creativity. When we're going a little bit off subject, but if I ask you, can you name 20 things that are white? That's a little bit difficult. But if you say, can you mention 20 things that are white in your house? When you put a frame into something, it becomes easier. So when people say, well, but I don't like things that kind of put edges on my creativity. No, it actually makes you more creative when you give yourself restraints.
Yeah.
So same with poems and stuff like that. It explodes your creativity by giving it some rules to stick to. It's kind of the same thing. Like restrict the amount of books you're reading, and more likely you're going to go deeper into the subject, and you're going to get more out of it. When I read The Laws of Human Nature by Robert Greene, I thought like I could spend the rest of my life studying this book and just this book, and I won't get to apply all of this and become good at it.
Yeah, something I've been doing as well is clearing out my bookshelves and I think about which books I want to keep. And if there's a book that I don't want to reread, then that's usually a good sign that it should just go. Because if upon first reading I feel to myself, well, I don't really not inspired to read it again, I've spent a lot of the last year or so rereading my favorite books.
That's
and it's so important because you almost feel inspired. Like I've read, like my brother came in the other day and he comes in on a fairly regular occasion to ask me for books. And it's almost like I've become a library to him, but it's good. And he said, give me something that will blow my mind like that. And I thought, wow, that is a tough thing. I gave him 12 Rules for Life by Jordan B. Peterson because it had a massive impact on me, like a huge impact. And I've read it like 4 or 5 times. I've listened to the audiobook like 6, 7 times. It's had such a, and every single time I open it up, it just illuminates me in a different way. And I'm reading his second book right now, Beyond Order. To go back to the story of my brother, is he read the first chapter, which is Stand Up Straight with the Shoulders Back. And he's like, I'm having an existential crisis right now after reading that first chapter. And I'm like, good. Because that's what it's supposed to do. When you read something that has weight to it, it should make you question everything around you in your own way of thinking. And books like that are the ones that I just want to reread all the time, because the more you read it, the more weight there is to it, rather than the other opposite way around. You know, you never want to read a book like, for instance, if you read The Laws of Human Nature, the more you read it, the more you're going to find in it. And that's when you know you've come across a really great book. And I'm reading a second book right now, Beyond Order. And, you know, I'm nearing the end of it. And I thought to myself, I want to put a review out for this. But at the same time, I want to read it again, because I feel like I've read it, but I feel I've only read it from the periphery. Like, I feel like I've just touched the first layer of it. And I've got this internal feeling for myself. I'm like, because when the book came out, I saw someone do a review the day after it came out. And I thought to myself, how have you consumed that book and thought about it and reflected on it in a day?
Right.
Like, you must have just skimmed through that and just come up with a basic conclusion. And I don't particularly want to do that anymore. And I'm just trying to think about how I manage that. But yeah, I think the way that I've approached it is like The Obstacle is the Way, or Can't Hurt Me, or 12 Rules for Life, or Mastery, or, you know, fiction books that I've read and want to return to. I've recently read The 80-20 Principle again by Richard Koch, and I'm like, why am I not reading this more often? It's like, it's a fundamental law of physics and nature, and I should just read it all the time. I just don't know why I'm not reading it all the time. It just, yeah, it's something that I'm thinking about a lot. So it's good to know that you are as well.
We get distracted by the new books, but you know, as you were saying that, it made me realize that part of the reason why I keep reading new books is I'm looking for those life-changing books. So every book that I crack open, I'm thinking, is this going to be another The Laws of Human Nature? Is this going to be another Meditations? And you're hoping for that. You're looking for that initial high that those books give you, because some books have transformed my life completely. And
like which ones? Like, you talked about Laws of Human Nature. Which other ones?
yes. So I think The Art of Seduction, um, The Game by Neil Strauss, it sent me on a path of becoming more social and talking more to people and realizing how to interact with other people. Those were some Rich Dad Poor Dad is what led me into this path of financial freedom. That I'm happy that I read that book when I was 17 or so, because now I get to enjoy all that. But it's what got me started. So say Rich Dad Poor Dad. Um, what else have I read? Let me take a look at my shelves because I have things. Um, there's this great book called Too Soon Old, Too Late Smart.
Oh, someone recommended that to
Oh
me
man,
too
it's such.
recently.
I think it's the book that I gifted the most. It's a very easy read. I think I've gifted it so much because it's short. It's very easy
Okay.
to read. It's 30 chapters. Each chapter is like 2 pages. So for people that don't read that much, like here you go. And that book kind of compiled everything that I've read on personal development. And is this psychotherapist for he did psychotherapy for about 50 years or so, and he compiled like the most fundamental problems that people will come up to him with, and then his analysis on those problems and how to kind of work through them. And he has some beautiful insight. Like one of them that I've been thinking a lot lately, it's a chapter called Only Bad Things Happen Fast. Like everything that's good in life, you have to work for it, and like
So true.
but the bad
So
things it just
true.
happen. So the subtitle is 33 things about the world that you need to know now, something like that. It's just a wonderful book, and it's short, it's easy to read. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. But I think that many times when I keep buying books and reading more, I'm just looking for those books that could just send my life in a whole other direction. And that's why you kind of keep reading them many times, where I keep consuming, just trying to find those things. And then the other ones that I breezed through them and just didn't get much out of it and just went on, they become the cost of finding the really good ones. Just like with relationships, you got to be out there and talking to people to see
Mm,
who is going to become your new best friend or who's going to become your partner.
mm,
It's just part of it. We got to take that risk. And many times with books, it's like, okay, I spend 2 3 days, but the risk is not that much. You spend a couple of hours and $20. Books are so cheap.
mm.
But many times the reason I tend to keep consuming and sometimes I forget, I try to find the balance of going to old books or new books, is because I'm trying to find that next gem. I think many times, like I'm a miner, I'm just mining for this gold
Mm.
and see if I can find it, because I know it could completely change everything.
Something that I've found to be really effective is bibliographies
Mm-hmm.
and reading lists of people that I admire.
Yep.
Those seem to be a really good, from my experience, of validation for good books. And I've never really been disappointed by a book that's someone that I've admired and has recommended. So that's when I usually find myself, I want a really good book, I go to someone that I admire. They're not people that I know personally, but they might have a reading
Yes.
list. And I think to myself, okay, let's see if there's one here that I haven't got. And I usually get it. And I'm very rarely disappointed. What I'm finding is if a book's just come out, then it doesn't really have the validation to it unless I know the author and I've read something that's come before.
Right.
And that's something that I struggle with, particularly because obviously with the podcast, a lot of the books that I read and have the authors on there, they've just published the book, so I can only really talk to the periphery about the ideas, and I wouldn't say they are like deeply like philosophical or books or whatever that might be. So they're very much about either like business, or they're about a new, for instance, we had this series on like artificial intelligence and climate change, and they're contemporary issues, so we can have a discussion about it. But
Right.
for my own interest of reading, like a book like I was talking about, but like the map of knowledge, like stuff like that,
Uh,
is you have to spend time, and there's weight to it. And I feel like the more that I read those books, the better I am for it. And I think that's something that you need to be cognizant of, definitely.
yes. Kind of tagging along with what you were saying about spending the time with the book and with the 12 rules of life, of how many times you've read it. I think it's really important that you spend time with these ideas. And remember earlier in the conversation, we talked about like how undervalued it is, just the amount of time you spend with something.
Yeah.
Sometimes I want a book to last me much longer because I need my subconscious to be thinking about these ideas too often. So my I'm very against Blinkist and this
Yeah.
apps that is like the 15-minute book. And I think they're great if you use them just to explore the book, to prime your mind for what you're about to learn. It's like, oh, okay, so these are the main ideas and this is gonna what I'm gonna find. But then the value of reading the entire book, even if the main ideas were already summarized, is that you're spending time with those ideas. You're spending times discussing with the author, okay, getting the entire point. Sometimes it's not about just, oh, look, here's the essence. What we were saying is not just the message, it's the package.
Yeah.
Sometimes the package is as impactful that it sticks with you. Sometimes it's the way the message is delivered. And for that, you need to read the entire book and you need to spend time with those ideas, brewing with those ideas, how they change your mind. When I read a Rich Dad Poor Dad, or lately the Psychology of Money, I would have to stop myself because I was enjoying the book too much. It's like, no, this can't be a book that I read on one day. Like, I need these ideas to be sticking with me and to think about them more often. I can't just finish it and move on to the next one.
Yeah.
And people forget the value of just spending time with the ideas. And I think that's why it's important to read the entire book, and why I'm against the summaries, the look, here are the bullet points. They have no impact. Sometimes you need the entire argument for you to get it. It's like, okay, yeah, it wasn't just about the idea. Now the argument is what stays with you. It makes everything tied together. You don't need to reread the argument later on. That's why you do the underlinings and stuff. So your underlinings become your Blinkist, but it only can happen after you've read the book.
I liken it to trailers in context to movies. Like if someone came to me and said, like, if they've watched, for instance, let's say the Lord of the Rings trilogy, with the Fellowship of the Ring, the Twin Towers, and then the Return of the King. Like, I love those. They're amazing movies and an amazing trilogy. Hobbit as well. They're wonderful. But if someone came to me and said, like, oh, I've watched all the Lord of the Rings, I'm like, cool, okay, which one is your favorite? He's like, no, I've only watched the trailers for all three of them. It's like, wait, what? And I feel like the same when someone says to me, oh, I've read, Atomic Habits or whatever it might be. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like, what do you think of environmental design and that chapter and that part of the book? And they're like, oh no, I only like looked at the Bink list kind of thing. It's like summary bullet points. I'm like, yeah, you haven't understood it. And it's what we were talking about memorizing a concept, for instance, environmental design. Like, this is what I've been thinking about myself. It's like, do I really understand what environmental design is, or do I just know what the definition of it is? Like, have I understood it myself? Do I live that? Am I living out that principle myself? And I think that's really important for someone like me, for instance. If I'm talking about these books and I'm sharing them, there might be some cognitive dissonance if I'm talking about them and I don't understand them. And I feel like this is perhaps the perils of being a content creator to a degree, because these ideas aren't yours, and it's very easy to assume that they're yours just by speaking about them, and that you know about them just by speaking about them. So I think about that a lot.
Yes. And it's a great point when you said the like watching the trailer, and it could even be just a summary. Let's say that someone came up with a 30-minute summary of the trilogy of the Lord of the Rings. Like, no. Or I think about it like, if you imagine a great TED talk or just a speech, and then someone gives you the PowerPoint. Like, you're not going to memorize it. Even you're not going to internalize the message because you didn't have everything that came around it. So in the end, what stays with you are the key ideas, yes, but you needed the arguments and you needed everything around it for you to really have a grasp, like an understanding of those ideas. Of course, there are authors that are not that great. They have one single idea for business, and then the publisher said, well, you need to make this blog post into a 300-page book. For those, that's fine. Yes, I understand there are books like that. But to me, I don't know what a summary of maybe 20 pages of the laws of human nature would look like. It would be interesting exercise to watch the Blink list for the laws of human nature and say, what the hell did this guy put in the summary? Or think about like the summary of 12 Rules for Life. Someone could read just the name of the chapter and say like, oh yeah, I get it. No, man, you don't.
It's funny. Some people, some person did that they did a review of the new one, and they put out highlights and they just highlighted the chapter names.
Yeah, no, it's not. It's not
And I
enough.
thought to myself, oh, okay.
Because we also need, here's an important point. We need to understand an emotional level. If I say to you the universe is really big, you're like, yeah, well, I know. But if we went outside on a moonless night, far into the country, and you saw the Milky Way with your
Yeah.
naked eye, you'd be like, damn, the universe is big. And it's the same knowledge. It feels completely different. So we need not just intellectual understanding, but emotional understanding of many of these ideas. And that's how we get to apply them and really change our lives. Just the intellectual side of it is not enough.
So important. And then that value that you get from having that emotional connection outweighs memorizing it by, I don't know how, like
Yes.
infinite. I'm going to say infinite because it's unquantifiable once you
Right.
really understand something to that depth, the value that you get from it. It can't be
Yes.
replicated by anything.
No, no, I can't. And I also know that this is kind of sticking with the Blinkies part, but moving into audiobooks. I know people love audiobooks. I'm not that much of a fan unless I'm kind of it's a book that I already read or something. And it's because I don't feel there is this interactivity unless you're sitting down to really concentrate on what you're listening. But if you're like going to the gym and working out, I don't think you get it's still valuable, but I don't think you get the same value that you get from a book because the book forces you to stop everything else. You can't be preparing coffee and reading or like exercising and reading. You really
You
need
can
to
try.
stop everything else. You could try, yes, because you need to stop everything else and really be there and having that
Yeah.
conversation with an author. To me, like when you sometimes you're reading and you're distracted and you finish a paragraph and like, I don't know what that said. I think that a lot of those moments happen when you're doing audiobook.
Mm.
So unless you're sitting down and you're like, okay, I'm gonna listen to this, and or you're marking parts that you want to review after, because many things we can absorb in that passive state, especially the stories or the argument behind the idea. But if you're not reviewing it, I think there's a lot lost there.
So
So
my relationship with audiobooks is I either use as an introduction to see whether I actually want to buy the book,
yep,
or what I do is I actually listen to the audiobook and read the book at the same time if it's
yep,
something that's complex.
yes,
So like
that makes sense.
I don't particularly just fall on an audiobook on its own. Um, but it does also depend on the context, once again, of what the book is. If it's like, for instance, a biography or if it's a story or whatever it might
Yeah,
be, then I
you can
think
listen.
I think that's okay because it's like
Yep.
imagine consuming, for instance, like a fiction book, whatever fiction book, insert fiction book. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, especially if it's narrated by someone that you enjoy.
Yep.
But if you're trying to read, for instance, your favorite book, The Laws of Human Nature, and you're just
Mhm.
listening to it, I don't know how long that audiobook would be. It'd probably be 20 plus hours or something.
Yeah, it will be long.
So yeah, you're not going to get the same. And
Yes,
when I listened to 12 Rules for Life, it was as a supplement to reading it. And I think
that
like
makes sense.
I would like what I would do is I would basically read a chapter. For instance, if I was going to go before I go to work, I would like read a chapter,
Mhm.
and then I'd be in the train and I'd be re-listening to the same bit that I just read
Right.
and listening to
Nice.
it because then you get a different experience, especially if it's read
Yeah,
by the author.
you do for sure, for sure. And
And then when you get, sorry to interrupt, but then when you go back to the book, you've got the voice of the author in the head when you're reading the book. I love that.
yes, that is a good point. I have nothing against audiobooks. I just don't think that they give you the punch that the actual book would give you, just for the reasons that I mentioned. Many times you're distracted, you can't really be underlining or having this discussion, this back and forth. Like I make a lot of notes, like marginalia I'm writing down in the book, also ideas that I get, things like that, and then everything's kind of condensed there, and it forces me to just be one on one. I don't feel like I have the same with audiobooks. I've listened to a couple of them. Um, I just don't think that it has the same punch.
Mm,
But nothing against them. I mean, if that's the way that people can listen or get some reading done, in a sense, like listening to
mm,
these books, then great. That's much better
mm,
than not doing it.
mm.
100%.
Yeah, I think it's a great introduction into it. Like I know some people, for instance, my mom, she prefers to listen to it as a form, but I
Yes.
think she's not consuming it, for instance, for the view of learning in the same way that
Mhm.
perhaps you and I might,
Yes.
because that's just not where her interest lies. It's more out of interest than anything. So I think sometimes it's just like we said, it's just all the grayness.
Yep. It depends.
Yeah,
It all
depends. It depends. That's probably a good way to leave it. We just leave it with "it depends," and that will be the title of this conversation. It depends.
Awesome.
But yeah, it's just I think we can talk for like another 3 hours.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So
we can geek all we can.
yeah,
We
can. But it was like I said, it was really good catching up again. And when when are you going? Are you going to Japan recently? I know we haven't really had a chance.
They cancel my flight. So
Bummer.
Japan is not receiving any foreigners right now. Yeah, it's a bummer because it's such an important time for me to spend a couple months in Japan. I feel like it refreshes me. It's kind of my snooze button for going insane. It's like, here, man, you spend some time in Japan, you can go for another year. You can make it another year. So
it's like a reset.
Yeah, I feel sad, but I dream about Japan like 3 times a week or so. It's so strange. I have this really strong relationship with the country and the people that I miss it. I miss it as if I were a friend.
It's amazing because when I spoke to Hector yesterday, he's been there for 18 years, and I asked him how he had changed as a person, because something that I've been thinking about is over the last year, I've come into contact with quite a lot of people that have visited Japan. They've either visited it, my mum visited it. I had Ben Aldridge, who's an author. He loves Japan. He's visited it many times. I've had yourself. I've had others that I've spoken to. And also then I had Hector yesterday. He's been there 18 years. Yep. And I don't know, I've never visited. And I spoke to my mum yesterday. It's going to be my next country to visit once all this is finished, because
awesome.
I've read so much about the culture, and I've found the people that I've been speaking to being touched by it. And Hector said something very interesting yesterday. He's like, whenever he's originally from Spain, and he says whenever he goes back to Spain, he feels like a part of him is left in Japan. And he said there's a spirit to when he touches down in Japan that he can't describe in words. And I thought that's very interesting, because it seems like they people who have gone there don't feel the same way about any other place. And he said he can't talk about it in words. It's like it's just a feeling.
It is just a feeling, and I agree with him. I feel the same way when I touch Japan. It's something different. And the first time that I spent some extended time there, I remember we went to the city next to Tokyo called Kamakura, and I was overwhelmed by this feeling. And it sounds dark, but it might give you an idea of what it felt like. But what I thought is, I want to come to die here. I want my days to end here. Like that would be happy. I would smile if the last thing I saw was part of this country. It's so strange.
You want your body to become part of this soil, kind of thing.
In a way.
Yeah.
It's like the very end, just looking back and saying, I'm here in Japan. Everything was worth it if I can end here. I don't know. It's just such a special connection. It's hard to describe, but the country, the energy, and then the people. I've never felt human before. I know that's a strange statement, but it's the first time I felt human, like I was part of something, because everything's so about the community, and everyone's so for everyone else. There's like, this is what we were meant to be. Not that everyone on their own, like taking advantage of everyone else. It's just all for ourselves. Like they do what's best for the community because they know that what's best for the community is also what's best for the individual. And you feel it. It's just beyond understanding. For us, it feels so foreign. But just one last story about Japan. I was there last year, and they come to deliver the mail, but I wasn't home, so they left me a notice. I'm like, all right, I guess I'll have to check with them later. So I left the apartment again, and then I come out at night, and the mailman is standing outside the building with my package. And I'm like, what's going on? And he's like, are you Nicholas? Like, yes. Oh, I didn't find you in the afternoon, so I came in the evening to see if maybe I could find you and give you your package. This is your mail. I'm looking at him like, this is insane. Like, he's just looking at me like, this is my job.
What time is this?
It was like 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. It was already dark. But he's part of that community. So he's the mailman for the area. So it makes sense. If you were my friend and I was supposed to deliver your mail, It's like something got to my place. I need to bring it to your place, and then pass by, and you're not there. And then I come later at night, and you'll be like, "Oh, thanks, man. Yeah, you came by later. You saw me." So it was that feeling of, "Hey, yes, you're part of this community. I'm also part of the community. So makes sense that your job is to bring me my mail, and you'll come later."
Yeah.
But for us, it's inconceivable. Then the last bit of that story also with mail is I returned to Canada. Months later, someone rings. I open the door. There's this package, and I see some Japanese letters on it. It's like, what? So I take the package and I open it. It was sent to the address that I had in Japan, but because of the pandemic, I had to come back, and I never received that piece of mail. Someone went to the trouble of seeing like what was the billing address and ship it all the way to Canada so I would receive my mail.
Without ever telling you?
No one told me, no one contacted me, nothing. It's just they could not deliver the mail at the place that I was staying in Japan because I had left.
That's not cheap.
And someone at
you don't know who it was?
Office, no, I have no idea. Someone at the post office said, our job is to deliver this piece of mail, even if the guy now lives in Canada. Because that's how they think. Like, how do I fulfill my job? My job is to deliver the mail to this person. He's waiting for his stuff. We don't know what it is. So we need to give it to him. And they send it to Canada. It's like, this doesn't compute on this side of the world.
That's crazy.
Everything they do is that way. When I was going to the Starbucks every morning, they make your coffee like they're delivering your baby. And the philosophy behind it is, maybe this is the 100th coffee that I've made, but this is the only coffee that this person gets to enjoy today. So everything's thinking about the other person. It makes you feel human. And then you want to do the same for others.
Yeah.
It changes you.
That's a great way to end it. I just want to finish on one quote that you said is a Confucius quote. You said that when you got there to Japan, it almost feels like you're living. It's like this is your way of living. And there's a Confucius quote that said, "We all have two lives, and the second one begins once we realize we have one." And I feel like that quote is a perfect quote to your point, and I think it's a great way to end it.
Yes,
perfect. Nick, it's always a pleasure.
It was awesome talking to you. We got to do this again.
Definitely. We do it again soon. Give it a bit of time.
Yeah, love talking to you, man.
Of course.
So, that's awesome. And keep me posted on the books.
We'll do.
Checking on what you're reading.
Will do. Take care. Yeah.
Take care.
All right, bye. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content. Also, visit our website, www.booktalktoday.com, to subscribe and download the latest edition of our magazine. Join our mailing list to receive the first issue for free, to get a taste for the value-packed content that we are offering. Book Talk Today, for readers, by readers.